Colleagues, hello again. We're back in the studio with our new speaker. This is Dmitry Shevtsov. I've known Dmitry since probably 2013.
2012.
Well, around 2012 or 2013. We met through joint projects that took place at different companies, and we would cross paths from time to time. All of these projects, of course, were in development companies, and for many years now, Dmitry has mainly served as a construction director. He's responsible for planning, oversight, construction, and commissioning of projects, all at the director level. And, well, he's one of those people who, in my opinion, genuinely promotes, or rather, not even promotes, but truly practices planning.
A true planning enthusiast.
Yes, exactly. A devotee of quality planning, a person who understands its benefits and sees them for himself.
Thank you. Well, when you called, I just said, I need to speak, to talk about planning. My first thought was, washing your hands is good, brushing your teeth is good, planning is good. What is there to talk about, really? We're all adults here. That's it. But then, after some time passed, I thought, well, if every company has planning, well, obviously it exists. There probably isn't a single development company where there isn't any planning, but often it's very fragmented. Some things are planned, some aren't, and it's different in each department, and gathering any information takes a ton of time. If there's some kind of deadline missed, you have to make a new schedule again, update it, and everything basically, all of this happens very chaotically, very fragmentarily, and really there's no system in place. Well, let's just say it's rare to find one. It does exist, but not in every company. If not every company has it, but everyone knows it's a good thing, then there must be some problems. So, as you rightly said, we started planning back in 2012, and since then I've been a construction director at various development companies. I understand that, well, when you're planning and building just one project, you can keep everything in your head. 2 projects is already more difficult. 3 and it becomes super stressful, and more than 3 is just impossible. Everything starts to fall apart.
Let me recall another thing you said. You've now reduced it to 3, but you once told me that as a director, you could manage 7 projects because there are 7 days in a week, 7 projects, 7 days. If you still take weekends off, then it's 5 projects.
Yeah. Well, there's a clear principle that you can manage 7 plus or minus 2 effectively, right? And that's it. We have this army principle, we have 9 people. And basically, a platoon issue, do they say IT regulations are written in blood? It's not just for nothing. That's why you can effectively manage up to 9 people. Beyond that, you start to lose efficiency and you need to build some kind of system. So with development projects, with construction, the number is even lower because the number of processes increases. If your project has several phases, that multiplies everything even more and so on. So anyway, getting back to where we started, I want to talk about the problems, right? Which ones? The problems aren't so much in planning itself, but probably more in implementing, this planning system. And, well, the problem is, let me just check my notes here for a second. So the first problem people run into, why do these projects fail? Everyone starts out, launches the project, but often everything just falls back into fragmented planning again. Most people abandon it, say it's ineffective, unnecessary, leave it partially implemented, and basically, once again, there's no system. So the first thing is, well, there's no goal. You need to start from the pain point. What is the pain point in the company? Missed deadlines, construction delays, and commissioning gets postponed. That's one pain point. For others, the pain is budgeting. People can't put it together, or they collect some costs, but in reality, they don't match what's actually happening. And for example, the case that happened at Tecter, the pain point was with the shareholders. Back then, there were no escrow accounts yet, and everything was built based on what had already been sold. So it was clear that the earlier you sold, the less profit you made. Because obviously the price of an apartment is higher at a later stage of construction. So what was the pain point? They reported the use of funds at the quarterly low, and accordingly, money was allocated for construction and installation work based on this usage. The funds were utilized at about 50%. When I came in, the utilization was 55% of the plan. Despite all this, the buildings were being constructed at a good pace. So basically, there weren't any major delays, right? Of course, in construction, there are always some things that aren't perfect, but overall, there were no water delays, there weren't any major problems, but the financial planning was lacking. And from the shareholder, there was a clear and straightforward request. Guys, we want the financial planning for construction and installation work to be no less than 80%.
So because you were hitting the plan?
Well, of course, why have 50% of the money unspent? You either have to pull it out of your working capital or you have to sell more apartments and so on. It's always a headache figuring out what to do with it. In the end, it was clear that the finance people resorted to tricks basically. Since they knew the builders were using up half as much, they just set their own plan for increasing these funds at half as much, and that's how it was handled. But it was a crooked scheme, really. So that's actually how you and I met over this issue. So how do we solve it? And so now we're faced with a real technical challenge. How do we solve this problem, right? So we start working through it. We need to plan based on volumes, on the construction volume, right? Because planning by time just isn't realistic. Construction is always tied to physical volumes. So how do you plan in terms of physical volumes then? Basically, you need some kind of product, a mechanism, right? And then how do you tie all of this together with the cost calculator, with the budget and so on? So a task emerges, the project implementation begins, and everyone clearly understands what the metric is. For example, after a year, we had 85% actual utilization of the budget for construction and installation work. So over the course of a year, we reached this goal, and then it ended up reshaping the entire company. Because, in fact, the implementation of planning really changes everything. Business processes are rearranged and reworked, the budgeting process itself becomes different, and so on. So the first thing you need is a goal. Just having a goal, like let's be for all the good things and against all the bad things, let's start planning something, right? And that's a bad goal right away. It's almost guaranteed, like 90% to end in failure. And the second issue, the second problem, I think the second main problem is resistance from management. That is, as soon as we start the planning process, it's like you open up all the information. All the information about the project becomes visible to everyone, including the management. Accordingly, anything you might want to hide or that nobody likes, like airing dirty laundry, gets brought out into the open. So you have to show all of this, all your problems are out in the open, and you start getting criticized for it. You realize this. And even if everyone says, yes, he's great, wonderful, people still have this fear, it sort of lives inside subconsciously. And people on the ground start to criticize the projector management in general, and this begins to slow down the process. They don't like it well, they feel threatened. And that's the second problem. So here you need to explain to people, to tell them, and make it clear that you don't get punished for telling the truth, you get punished for dishonesty, for hiding information, for distorting information. That's what you get punished for.
By the way, it's amazing. I completely agree with you. And this doesn't just apply to development and construction, but really to any business at all. And planning really takes off. That's probably the conclusion I can draw after 20 years of working with Primavera and other project scheduling systems, and implementing them, things really take off where there's a culture of accepting mistakes. Because when you start planning, you get a plan versus actual comparison. The actual result never matches the plan.
Absolutely.
If that's seen as the fault of the person who brought the plan, then no fool will ever bring one. I mean, what's the point? This tradition of punishing the messenger who brings bad news is still alive.
But you understand, development takes more than 3 years, right? That is, from the moment you buy a plot of land to, if we're talking about residential, the commissioning and handing over of apartments to the buyers, right? Depending on the project, it can be 2.5, 3 years or even longer. So over 3 years, everything can change. Well, we can all see how turbulent the last 3 years have been for us, and everything keeps changing. So it's clear that you can't just bring a plan and 3 years later say that you've executed it with 100% accuracy. Even a plan for just 1 month can change significantly, especially when we're talking about construction. That's why, in a way, the task of middle management isn't so much about, how should I put it, their job is to react. So, I mean, yes, myself and all my colleagues were basically putting out fires, as it was shown in the presentation, constantly putting out fires, because unfortunately our job is to fight chaos. And what's so great about construction is that there was chaos, right? Materials were scattered, who knows where, lying around in the rocks, and then suddenly a house appears. So of course we're fighting chaos. That chaos always seems to catch up with us. And the task isn't really to keep every milestone of the process in your head, right? You open the schedule and you immediately see the problem. You don't have to spend half a day trying to figure out where the problem is, talking to the construction management or with the contractors. You already see the problems here, and then you start putting out the fire, so you actually free up your time. But this awareness or the culture, we sometimes have a situation in our company where the messenger who brings bad news gets punished. Or sometimes a person just hasn't mentally reached the point of understanding that, so to speak, they're paid for their professionalism in quickly identifying problems and solving them fast, not for keeping quiet about them or distorting information. The third problem is that it gets encoded if middle management starts to resist. Then the employees definitely pick up on this and understand that the leadership is clearly not against it. And secondly, the employee suddenly gets new tasks that they haven't dealt with before, often for the same salary. They ask, why do I need this? And that's when sabotage begins. That is, data isn't provided or is provided late. Oh, I forgot, or, well, it's hard, it takes a long time. Why do we even need this? So basically, all these things really get in the way. It's a kind of internal resistance. In addition to the fact that we have to do something to implement this system within the company, there will definitely be resistance. So let's move on to the next point, shall we? The key success factor here is the will of the top executive. So if you assess who actually needs calendar planning, we find that at the initial stage, no one needs it except the CEO. The shareholder isn't involved in operational management, nor should they be. Middle management and employees don't want to reveal what they have hidden, right? Basically, it exposes them in an unflattering light. Accordingly, of course, the person who needs this the most is the one making decisions in the company, the one who bears all the responsibility, top executive. That's why if there is a clear will from the top executive, the implementation of the project, the introduction of planning, it all takes off immediately and the success rate increases dramatically. I remember Tecta, for example, where the top executive was involved. There were online meetings, yes, weekly meetings, especially during the first 9 months of implementation. Clear support. I mean, that really helps a lot. That's the first point. Second, during the implementation process, financial resources will be required. And who, if not the top executive, can authorize their use? This includes purchasing software and, yes, bringing in new specialists. In any case, if we're doing serious planning, we'll have to hire some additional staff planners, right? We need to build a system for entering data. So someone has to handle this, someone has to oversee it, someone has to maintain the system. So it's clear that it's money, money, money. And if the top executive doesn't understand why this is necessary, then obviously either they won't pay or it will be funded in some very limited way, right? And the person will constantly have to push for it to prove that it's needed, important, and so on. That's it. So a lot really depends on this as well. And the support of the top executive, I believe, is such a key task. And most importantly, probably the top executive sets this culture. So if there is a culture around mistakes, if the top executive understands that making mistakes is normal, that what's not normal is, well, hiding them, right? And it's also not normal to make the same mistake 3 times in a row, right? If you make this mistake once, it's not a big deal. But if the same thing happens a second or third time, then, well, maybe something needs to be done about it. The problem is probably somewhere else in that case.
These things are often seen as two extremes, right? So a culture of accepting mistakes is perceived as a weakness.
Yes.
So on the one hand, but on the other hand, it can go the other way too. Control means strength, it means pushing things through. And in the end, neither approach really works. Somewhere in between, we need to have a reasonable attitude toward accepting mistakes. Like you said, if you make the same mistake 3 times, that's a problem.
As a famous surfer once said when asked, "What are you going to do tomorrow?" he replied, "I'm going to look for balance." Yes, we need to look for balance, unfortunately, in everything, everywhere, always, and between, say, strict control and this culture of accepting mistakes, it needs to be balanced. At some point, democracy ends, but the top-down approach doesn't always work either. Kind of moving on to the next point I wanted to make, it's about why the first person is important there, right? And in general, is it even possible to plan there without any expenses? Yes, without major expenses, investments, and so on. Probably to a certain extent it is possible. That is, if we are implementing a project and reach the construction stage, then in principle we can even plan in Excel, nothing is stopping us. There are certain tasks, there are task trackers that monitor these tasks. So everything related to timing indicators, well, you don't really need to spend a lot of resources on that, right? There is a ton of software out there that allows you to do this. But as soon as we actually get to the critical construction phase, where tangible physical indicators and precise volumes become incredibly important, and since construction processes are often aggregated and grouped together, right? Or on the contrary, from lower level processes to higher level ones, and all of this needs to be tracked because supply chains emerge and there are issues there. So, well, in any case, we end up needing some kind of product. We're not satisfied with what's available, like in Microsoft Office, and we need something else, something different. Accordingly, this means money, time, and the commitment of everyone involved, including the company's top management. So that's basically one of the main things I wanted to say. But like...
In this regard, I don't know, there's a question here responding to Kirill from St. Petersburg, who writes that he really confirms what you said, that indeed any implementation of network calendar planning can turn out to be quite expensive. And in small companies, the top executive most often says, look, I don't need all these expenses of yours, I'll just go and do it myself. So I guess that's what we started talking about. From what point, in your opinion, does it actually make sense to get into this, to hire planners, set up the infrastructure, and engage in this kind of planning?
If your company is in-house, you have, say, 5 projects, no more. If there's a leader who can keep those 5 projects in their head and keep track of them, then a project manager is more than enough, right? And just sitting there drawing Gantt charts in Excel to track how the monolith is growing, that's also enough to control these types of work. But again, it all depends on who your contractor is. If you trust the person, they're professional, they don't lie, most importantly, they don't hide things, then it's possible to manage 5 projects. But if your plans are to expand and you have construction sites in different regions with different time zones and you start having a bunch of people you don't know personally, right? Even your deputy, your top person starts to get stretched thin, and that already begins to cause setbacks. So here you need much deeper planning. You have to understand not just how your concrete structure is progressing, but also your delivery schedules, tender schedules, and yes, payment schedules start to come into play. There are just so many things, like a layered cake piling up on the construction project, and trying to keep all of that in your head, I think, just doesn't make sense. Plus, I believe that the top person should definitely be focusing on developing the company as well, and there simply won't be any time left for that. So basically, I would probably set the limit for myself at 5 projects. That's about the level where you can still keep things in your head. Beyond that, everything starts to fall apart, and incompetence becomes more costly than competence, right? So here it is, you have to pay money, build a system, spend time on it, right? It's not cheap, it's tough. And it definitely takes, well, probably at least 9 months to implement, because it's a methodology, pilot project, testing, training. So it's definitely 9 months. You can do it in less. But after that, you end up with, well, I don't even know how to evaluate the mirror. Here's a mirror, how much? What does the mirror actually bring, right? Probably you can't really monetize it, but in that mirror, you can see yourself, fix your tie, I don't know, something else, right? You can fix your hair. That's planning is a mirror, really. And in that mirror, you see the whole company, the entire project, and basically where it's headed.
But you also talk a lot about the portfolio because it's really important how you can access it. So if you have 5 properties, that's 5 site visits, and you can visit one on Monday, another on Tuesday, a third on Wednesday, and handle all the operational issues at each construction site as they come up. But that's just one scenario. But if you can't even get to those properties anymore, or you can only visit them once a month, then you have to untangle a whole mess later on without any planning.
Well, yes, that's true. And how should I put it? The problem here is that even people who are actually involved in construction, like the construction director of a specific site, sometimes, even though the construction headquarters is right there, say, just 150 or 200 meters away from the site, right? And sometimes you realize that he only shows up there once a week. Well, not because he's a bad person or anything like that. He just has a ton of operational work he needs to handle. There are reports, schedules, meetings with contractors, discussions about deliveries, tenders, and so on. So the person who's responsible for this, right, is there once a week. And the person making the decisions has a bunch of other headaches to deal with, right? How often can he actually be at the construction site? If he's lucky, once a week, and honestly, even then, more like a tourist. Really, that's just how it is. So he'll come take a look at how clean things are, right? He'll ask how many people are on site, how we're keeping up with the schedule. Well, if the person is a professional builder and, say, the top manager, then maybe he'll understand things a bit more deeply. But if he's not a builder, it's unlikely he'll be able to assess the situation just by looking around for half an hour. He simply won't get it. That's why planning is going to be a huge help for him here.
You just forget what the original plan was. To understand the reality, you need to know what the goal was.
Exactly. Well, I've talked about the problems. I just wanted to say at the end of my report that it's not all that bad. I just wanted to pitch the idea to middle management that, guys, planning isn't a burden. Well, it's hard, but it's actually beneficial for you. So if you have indeed crossed that particular line and your company does not punish you for bringing forth potentially bad news, then you absolutely need to carefully plan ahead. You absolutely need to meticulously plan at the very least, because first and foremost, you effectively clear a significant amount of information out of your mind and your head that you genuinely don't need to constantly keep stored in there, right? You have a schedule for that and you understand the problem. Second, with a schedule, it's always easier to explain to management what's happening on site, right? And to show that we have a problem here, and in a month that problem will appear here, and in 2 months over there, and essentially will end up somewhere as a result. And to justify your needs, like increasing the number of contractors or raising rates for contractors, for example, because you need to quickly bring in more labor, right? And you need to plug this problem that suddenly popped up, right? There are plenty of cases where a contractor company was working well, everything was fine, and then suddenly, bam, their accounts get frozen by the tax authorities. It turns out that somewhere with another counterparty something happened and all their accounts were frozen. You can't pay this company anymore. You have to urgently replace the company. Bringing in a new company takes time and money because the market rates have changed. And justifying all of this, all of it means the project gets delayed by 2 or 3 months. It just gets pushed back. That's one set of costs. And the increase in rates and the need to quickly bring in other contractors, that's roughly speaking about 10% of what we lose. Of course, it's much easier to explain this to management with a schedule and a breakdown, because if you know how to work with this, your value on the market also increases. You can also advance within your own company because systematic people are always in demand everywhere. That's 100% true. If a person can easily set up a system on their own project, they can scale it within the company, and that's what you call a win-win for everyone, right? That's why you need to walk through your fears here. And then, so to speak, the likelihood of completing this project, of bringing it to fruition, will of course increase many times over.
By the way, that's insightful observation. I really like the point about capitalization, about the personal capitalization of middle management in construction, in the sense that your value increases as you learn to systematically manage projects, moving from 1 to 2 and beyond.
Well, look, I had a case, for example, with the company PSN, which no longer exists now. Obviously, there was a change of ownership and everything else. But the CEO, in principle, wasn't concerned about the construction. That is, he completely trusted me there as the project manager, and there was really no reason for him to get deeply involved and so on. Despite all that, I realized that the construction was starting to expand. I needed to handle that. I wasn't implementing some major project there. I was just carrying out a project to introduce calendar planning, yes, in physical volumes, not in money, just in physical volumes within my own projects, my own sites. I got a small amount of funding for that, right? And so we implemented all of this together. It was fine. I think that if things had turned out differently for the company, you know, if life had gone another way and the company had kept growing, I believe it could have been a really good startup based on that planning. Financial planning would have naturally followed like beads on a string. That's it. And the company structure itself would have evolved. That is, you don't necessarily have to launch some massive project, overhaul the entire company and turn it into something completely different. Of course, it's very painful. It's hard. And not every leader is ready for that. When, you know, basically don't scratch where it doesn't itch, what's the point? Yes, in the future, there's probably an 80% chance that the company itself will like it and it will start to transform and move into a slightly different stage.
No, there are no miracles. These calendar network planning systems like Primavera and Project have been around for a long time. Millions of companies around the world have worked with them in one way or another. But the issue is never about the software. It's really not about the software at all. The real question is how ready you are this culture of accepting mistakes, the ability to build the planning process, the daily collection of facts, this regularity, and so on.
Let me add something important here, specifically about restructuring processes and about what you mentioned, that it has to be the will of the top leader. I'll also add my 2 cents, since I also worked at Tect. Unfortunately, we just missed each other there by about a month. So you left and I came in right after that. I joined as a planning engineer when Primavera had already been implemented. When I found out some time later that, as it turns out, the Primavera implementation project had only wrapped up about 2 months before I joined the company, I was, to put it mildly, surprised. Because the processes had been so thoroughly reworked and so seamlessly integrated into the company's day-to-day operations. For example, you couldn't even get a work completion certificate signed by the general contractor if your volumes weren't confirmed in Primavera. And here I probably have a question about the Tecta case. Was there resistance there, or was it just the will of the first person that nipped it all in the bud?
Well, the resistance was 100%
That's all fine.
impossible. That is, miracles don't happen there. People are what they are. We are all afraid. Our fears guide us through life. So it's clear that there was resistance. I even know of a real case there when there were many attempts to approach the top person saying, why do we need this? So many resources are being spent. People are getting distracted. All of this is nonsense. And, well, thank you very much that it didn't die out, right? And the general director stood firm on this, right? That is, he needed it. First and foremost, he was the one who needed it, that's all. And when this person needs something, he'll make everyone work, right? If he doesn't need it, then no matter what we do, nothing will work out. Well, we all know that.
Of course.
From experience.
And here, not even talking about Tecta, but about different companies. After all, slightly different tasks are always being solved. The tasks that are handed down from above are the ones that actually get solved.
Exactly.
And so when we talk about, like when you were just talking about PSM, that was your planning task, you were trying to plan the construction and solve your own problem as the construction director, because you needed the volumes, you needed to know whether the working documentation would be ready on time or not. to coordinate deliveries and so on. But the case with TECT is more of an integrated planning task where you also integrate finances into the whole thing, tying it all together with some of the key business needs like systematic financing, keeping money in deposits. After all, the money sits there and earns interest, but when it's spent on construction, it's gone. So you want to avoid overspending unnecessarily. So this really becomes the prerogative of the top executive.
Well, actually, how should I put this? It was kind of a bit of Alet's sleight of hand on my part, because I understood that, yes, I was the one who needed it. But I was absolutely certain that as soon as this started working over there, there would immediately be interest. Listen, we know how to plan physical volumes, but what about the money side of things? And in the end, the main question is always whether we're within the budget or not, right? Where is the financial model headed, right? Are we making a profit or a loss? And it's clear that you'll never understand this if you don't have a construction schedule. But the construction schedule is needed precisely to understand what's happening with the money and the project's profitability, not the other way around.
But it is the foundation. Without it, you can't understand anything.
That's why I'm saying, from my perspective, I understood that when you have 5 projects planned and in a year you're supposed to have 13 projects coming in, it was clear to me that we definitely wouldn't be able to handle it. We need to implement a planning system because 13 projects is already a serious matter. That's it.
It's just the flip side of the coin that very often the top executive sets the task of control and financial management, and middle management or even top management probably tries to solve it head on. Like, we need to manage finances, so let's make a financing schedule. Where are we going to get the financing schedule from? Now we'll wet our finger and hold it to the wind, roughly guess which way it's blowing, and draw up a financing schedule. Then this financing schedule ends up with that specific plan versus actual situation you were talking about. And that's how it was in the early days, including at TECT, right? And until you attach a full-fledged production schedule to ITON that takes into account the technology, the specifics of the contractors, the equipment you have on site, it just doesn't work. Well, that's how it seems to me.
And then you also have to keep updating it. I mean, like many companies, so why is there also this sort of psychological problem, for all the people involved and so on? Because, well, life changes and the schedule changes, the schedule becomes outdated. You have to constantly rethink this schedule. When you do the same work several times, you get tired of it, you want to quit, that's how it is. But in reality, well, there's just no way around it. And that's why no one wants to deal with it, right? Everyone says, well, we already made a schedule. The schedule was made 2 years ago, and everything has already changed since then. So what should be the degree of updating for this schedule? You start talking to people, let's at least do it once every 6 months to start with, but ideally it should be once a quarter. Now, once a quarter? Come on, then we'll be doing nothing but budgeting. Yes, we'll be spending a lot of time on budgeting, but if you want any degree of, accuracy in the budget, then even 6 months is already off the mark. Because I come to the construction site and a week later, the situation is completely different. Everything changes. It's never the case that everything is planned out and everything goes smoothly. After all, it's not robots working there, it's people, right? And these people, well, they make mistakes too, don't they? And often we hire the cheapest contractors, right? Because we can't afford to hire only the expensive ones. And even an expensive contractor isn't necessarily a guarantee that everything will suddenly go well for you, that your construction will take off, everything will be on schedule and everything will be great. That's absolutely not true either. These are people, because even within the same company, there are different people working, and one general contractor might have a team that delivers with a 90% probability, while another team is more like 50-50. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't. So which team will you end up with, right? Even though the legal entity is excellent, reputable, and well-known, well, cases like this happen too.
Because they're solving their own business problems. What their priorities are today, nobody really knows. It's not written on the legal entity.
What is written on the legal entity is profit maximization.
Well, yeah.
At the client's expense.
Any questions?
Number, unfortunately, we're out of time. Yeah, we really got carried away talking.
Come on, I thought we'd only been talking for 20 minutes. Has it really been that long?
Yes, time's already up, unfortunately. Dmitry, thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
I think we'll invite you again more than once. It turned out to be really interesting.
Yeah, it did. I enjoyed it too. It was a really lively conversation, and honestly, 40 minutes is clearly not enough for it. There's still so much more we should discuss.
I see this quite an active discussion starting up in the chat as well.
People are discussing software products over there, and we didn't even get to them.
Well, we'll talk about the software next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, colleagues. We're taking a short break, and we'll be back with the next speaker.